There are moments in life that define you. For me, that moment was the reading of my father's will after his passing. He left behind $10 million, but how that money would be divided was another matter entirely. And in an instant, everything I thought I knew about my family and my future changed. The room was eerily quiet as the will was read. It was the first time since my father's death that I felt silence so thick. The air felt heavy, and I could almost hear my own heart pounding in my chest. Everything felt so strange. After my father's passing, the tension between me and my older brother Amit, who was 39, had been simmering for years. That moment, though, all the years of resentment, the rivalry, the misunderstandings, came to a head. My father had made a decision about how his $10 million would be split, and the choice was one I had never expected. Amit, my 39-year-old brother, has always been the golden child. The smart one, the successful one, the one who could do no wrong in my father's eyes. He'd always been the one who was better at everything, especially in my father's eyes. Every family gathering, every holiday, it was always Amit who had the answers, who got the praise. I've spent my whole life feeling like I could never measure up. And now, in this moment, everything came crashing down. The will revealed the division of the money. Amit would get $8 million, and I would receive only $2 million. In that instant, it felt like my entire world was flipped upside down. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, trying to be someone my father could be proud of, and yet I was left with so little. Amit, always so calm, collected, and confident, barely flinched. But I saw it in his eyes. He knew exactly what this meant. The look on his face told me everything. This was his moment to shine. And I was still the little brother who could never quite live up to his expectations. As the will was read aloud, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. My father had been everything to me. I loved him, respected him, and I always tried to make him proud. But now, it felt like the love I gave was somehow not enough. I felt like my entire identity was being questioned. Weeks passed, and things started to spiral. Amit immediately started pushing for his share. I could feel the tension growing with every passing day. He didn't just want the money, he wanted control. He always had. And now, with that much money at stake, I felt like a small part of me was dying inside. I couldn't stand the idea of him walking away with so much more, knowing that I had tried just as hard as he had to earn my father's trust. Every conversation we had felt like a battle. Dad always saw me as the one who could take charge. Amit would remind me, his voice calm, but filled with that same superiority that always drove me mad. I was the one who made the hard decisions for the family, and you, well, you didn't exactly carry the same weight. I would bite my tongue, but the resentment boiled inside me. I wanted to shout, to tell him that it wasn't fair, that I was just as worthy. But the words never came out. He would always have the upper hand, always be the one who seemed to understand everything better. I was stuck in a game where the rules were never clear, but the stakes were too high to walk away from. I tried to focus on my own life, but how could I? The money, the inheritance, it had taken over everything. I wasn't just fighting for my share. I was fighting for my place in this family, for my father's respect. I was fighting to prove to myself that I mattered, that I wasn't just the little brother who could never get things right. After the reading of the will, things between me and Amit quickly became strained. We'd always had our differences, but this was something deeper. It wasn't just about the money. It was about years of feeling unseen, feeling less than. And now, the mirror of that truth was right in front of me. My father's will didn't just hand over a fortune. It handed me a bitter reminder that no matter how hard I tried, I was never enough. I couldn't shake the anger that simmered beneath the surface. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself, working long hours, taking on extra responsibilities, trying to make my father proud. And now, after all that effort, I was left with a mere fraction of the wealth Amit would get. The weight of that inequity crushed me every time I thought about it. But what hurt even more was how Amit seemed to relish his victory. He would casually mention the money, his plans, and the future. Everything in a tone that made me feel like I was still just the little brother, the one who would always come second. The family gatherings became unbearable. Every holiday, every birthday, anything that brought us together felt like a reminder of the divide that had grown between us. Amit would show up with his usual self-assurance, the kind that always made me feel small in comparison, and I couldn't help but watch as he took control of every conversation, every decision. My mother would sit there quietly, as always, not saying anything, letting Amit lead the discussions while I just played along, feeling more and more like an outsider. One evening, a few months after the reading of the will, Amit called me. I picked up, expecting another conversation about the inheritance or some other trivial matter. Instead, it was different. "Listen, we need to talk," Amit said, his tone serious, no longer carrying the usual confidence. "I've been thinking." "About what?" I asked, already on edge. "The money. The inheritance," he continued, his voice more measured. "I know things have been tense between us, but I think we need to sort this out. For the family." I felt my chest tighten. "Sort what out?" I asked, my voice sharp without meaning for it to be. He paused for a moment before responding. "Look, I don't want to keep fighting. I'm offering you a deal." "A deal?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What kind of deal?" He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I'll give you more money. Not much, but I'll give you some of my share if you'll just let me handle things from here on out. You don't have to worry about the business or the family stuff. You can take your share and go do whatever you want with it. But I need to be in charge." I sat in stunned silence. The audacity, the arrogance. After all the years of feeling overshadowed by him, now he was offering me a fraction of what he had just because he didn't want to share control. It was as if everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, meant nothing to him. "No," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want your money, Amit. I want what's mine. I don't need you to hand me scraps." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, it was more urgent, more insistent. "I'm trying to be reasonable, okay? You don't get it. This isn't just about us. It's about the business, the family legacy, everything." "Everything?" I shot back, suddenly filled with a cold rage. "You mean your legacy, your control, your rules?" There was a pause, and I could hear him exhale through the phone. "You're being unreasonable. I'm trying to help you." "I don't need your help," I snapped. "I'll figure it out on my own." "Don't call me again, Amit." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. It felt like I had just stepped back into a battlefield I didn't want to be part of. The fight wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the years of resentment that had built up between us. The inheritance was just the trigger, the catalyst for everything we had buried deep inside for so long. The days after that call were a blur. I tried to focus on my work, on my life outside the chaos Amit seemed to want to drag me into. But every time I saw him, every time I spoke to him, the animosity between us grew. Amit was relentless. He tried to push me out of every decision, every family discussion. It was like he wanted to erase me from the picture entirely. He wanted control, and I wanted respect, and that wasn't something I was willing to compromise on. But I couldn't avoid him forever. A few weeks later, we found ourselves face to face again at a family meeting. It was supposed to be about the business, but of course the conversation turned back to the inheritance. And once again, Amit took charge, just as he always had. He turned to me with that familiar smug look on his face. "We need to talk about your share. You can either accept my offer, or we can keep fighting this out in court. You choose." I could feel the anger rise within me, but I kept it under control. "I'm not going to sell out, Amit. I'm not going to let you bully me anymore." He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "You're just like Dad, you know, stubborn, proud, and look where that got him." That hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I was just like Dad. I'd always been just like him, proud, determined, unwilling to back down. But now, it felt like that stubbornness was going to tear apart everything we had left. The next few weeks were unbearable. Every conversation, every encounter with Amit felt like we were living in the same toxic cycle. But now it was amplified by the inheritance. The money had become the wedge between us. But deeper than that, It was the unspoken rivalry and years of resentment coming to a head. It was one evening, about a month after that last meeting, when I received a call that would change everything. It was from my lawyer. "Your brother has filed for full control of the estate," he said, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of what he was saying. "He wants to buy out your share and handle everything from here on out. He's claiming that you're unfit to manage your portion." I froze. My hands clenched around the phone as a rush of disbelief surged through me. He'd actually done it. After everything, after trying to push me out of every decision, now he was going to take it all? This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about everything we had built, everything I had worked for. "He can't do this," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "He can," the lawyer replied. "And if you don't act quickly, you'll lose your share. We'll have to go to court if you want to fight this." That was it. The last straw. I had spent my whole life trying to avoid conflict with Amit, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the good son. But now I realized something. He didn't care about peace. He didn't care about family. He cared about control. And I wasn't going to let him have it. I called Amit, my heart racing as I dialed his number. "What is this?" I asked as soon as he picked up. "What the hell are you trying to pull? You know I'm not going to just give up my share." "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Amit replied, his voice smooth, calm, almost patronizing. "You can't manage it. I can. I'm the one who has the experience. You're too emotional. You're not fit to handle this kind of responsibility." "Emotional?" I shot back, my anger bubbling over. "This is about control, isn't it, Amit? You've never seen me as an equal. This was never about family. It was always about you getting what you want." There was silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing. And then, in a softer tone, he said, "Look, I don't want to fight. I'm just trying to save you from making a mistake." "That's rich coming from you," I spat. "You want to take everything for yourself, and you've been using me as the scapegoat this whole time." "I'm doing this for the family," he said, his tone turning defensive. "I'm doing this because I care about the future." "Then why don't you care about me, Amit?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Why don't you care about what's fair? About what's right?" There was another long pause before he spoke again. "You'll see. One day, you'll understand." The conversation ended shortly after that. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next few weeks were spent gathering documents, making calls, and preparing for a fight I never thought I would have to endure. I had to fight for what was mine, for what my father had left me. I didn't just want the money. I wanted my father's legacy to mean something. I wanted to prove that I was capable of handling the responsibility, of standing on my own. But Amit wasn't going to let that happen easily. As I walked into the lawyer's office to sign the papers that would initiate the court case, I felt a deep sense of dread. This wasn't just a financial battle. It was a personal one. I was fighting against my own brother, against the very person who had always been my competition, my shadow. And I was starting to wonder if there was any way we could come back from this. Could we ever repair our relationship? Or had this battle over money and control finally torn us apart for good? The day we walked into the courtroom, it felt like a moment out of a bad dream. Amit, ever the confident one, walked in like he owned the place, his expensive suit sharp and immaculately pressed, as if everything in his life had always been meticulously planned. On the other side, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't the little brother anymore. It was about standing up for the respect I had never been given. We sat on opposite sides of the room, and the contrast couldn't have been more striking. Amit was the picture of composure, while I was trying to hold myself together. I could feel my palms sweating, my heart racing. It wasn't just the idea of losing the inheritance that scared me. It was the thought of what would happen to the relationship we had, the years of family history and shared memories. We had always been close despite the rivalry, despite everything. But now it felt like we were strangers who were about to go to war over a fortune. The judge called the case to order. Both our lawyers exchanged pleasantries and began presenting their arguments. It all felt so surreal, as if I was watching a movie about someone else's life. Amit's lawyer was smooth, articulate, already painting the picture that I was an emotional wreck, unfit to handle the responsibilities that came with the inheritance. I couldn't deny the truth in some of their claims. I had always been more impulsive, more quick to react. But was that really enough to take everything from me? When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my legs shaky, my throat dry. I could feel Amit's eyes on me, that same calculating look he had always worn when he thought he was in control. I took a deep breath and began. "I'm here today, not just for the money, but for the principle," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My father left me this inheritance, and I intend to prove that I am more than capable of managing it. I've spent my whole life working for respect, working to be seen as someone who can make decisions. And I'm not about to let anyone, least of all my brother, take that away from me." I paused, glancing over at Amit. The smug look on his face was still there, but I could see a flicker of something beneath it. Uncertainty, maybe. He was starting to realize that I wasn't going to back down this time. I wasn't going to be the passive little brother anymore. I respect my father's decisions, but I also know that he would want me to have the opportunity to prove myself, to build something of my own, I continued. This isn't just about money. It's about my future. It's about honoring his legacy in my own way. The room fell silent for a moment. The judge nodded slowly, taking everything in. Amit's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. "We'll take a short recess," the judge said. "We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As I sat back down, I could feel the tension between Amit and me. We didn't speak, but the weight of the years we had spent fighting, competing, and resenting each other seemed to hang in the air. We were on opposite sides now, and it felt like there was no going back. The break was uncomfortable. I could feel Amit's eyes on me, but I refused to look his way. This wasn't a game anymore. The stakes were real, and the longer this dragged on, the more it seemed like we might lose everything. Not just the money, but the relationship. When we returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The judge called for the final statements, and both sides presented their cases. Amit's lawyer argued that I was too emotionally unstable to manage such a large sum of money, that I would be a liability, and that it was in the best interest of the estate for Amit to have full control. He painted me as reckless, as a person who couldn't be trusted with such a responsibility. Then it was my turn. "I'm not perfect," I said, my voice steady, "but I'm capable. I've been capable all along. I've built my life from the ground up, and I've fought for every step I've taken. My father trusted me, and I believe he would have wanted me to continue building, not just for myself, but for the family. I'm not asking for handouts. I'm asking for the chance to prove I can do this." The judge listened intently, and when the session ended, he called for another recess to deliberate. As we stood up to leave the room, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The uncertainty hung in the air. Would he rule in my favor? Or would Amit walk away with everything? The days after the hearing felt like an eternity. Every moment, every conversation was tainted by the uncertainty of what was to come. Amit and I didn't speak, except for the occasional exchange of cold words through our lawyers. I couldn't escape the feeling that something was slipping away, something that could never be repaired. No matter how the court ruled, I knew our relationship was already fractured beyond repair. Then, finally, the call came. The verdict was in. I was sitting at my desk, staring blankly at the papers in front of me when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. My stomach churned. "Hello? We've just received the judge's decision," my lawyer said, his voice measured but serious. "You need to prepare yourself." My heart sank. "What happened?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. "The judge ruled in your favor," he said, and I felt the weight of those words hit me like a wave. "You will retain control of your share of the inheritance. Amit has no claim over it." I didn't know how to react at first. A part of me felt victorious, but another part of me, the part that had been fighting this war for months, felt exhausted. I was done. I had won the battle, but I wasn't sure I had won the war. When I spoke to Amit that evening, it wasn't about the decision. It wasn't about the money. It was about something much deeper. "I won," I said simply, my voice almost a whisper. There was no joy in it. It was a hollow victory. Amit was silent for a long time. I could feel his anger simmering, his frustration building. Finally, he spoke. "I always knew you'd fight me on this," he said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. "You're just like Dad, always fighting for something that isn't worth fighting for." I felt a pang of hurt. "It's not about the money, Amit. It's about respect. It's about proving to myself that I'm not just the little brother, that I'm capable of standing on my own. But I'm tired. I don't want to keep fighting." His laugh was bitter. "You say that now, but this will never be over, will it? You'll always feel like you have something to prove." "Maybe," I said quietly. "But at least I'm done proving it to you." And with that, the conversation ended. We both knew where we stood. I had won the inheritance, but I had lost something much more important. The respect, the trust, the bond we once had, gone. I couldn't go back to pretending that things would ever be the same between us. Over the next few weeks, the aftermath of the ruling set in. Amit tried to make amends, sending messages, offering to meet, to talk things through. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. I couldn't bring myself to have a conversation with him that wasn't drenched in resentment. The truth was, I wasn't sure I could ever forgive him, not just for what had happened in the courtroom, but for everything that had led us here. His manipulation, his disregard for me, his belief that he had the right to control everything. It had poisoned our relationship for years. And yet, I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't just about money. It was about our father's legacy. It was about the way we had been shaped by him. Amit was the favored son, the one who had always been the golden child. I had spent my life trying to step out of his shadow, trying to prove that I was worthy of something more. But in the end, it wasn't about proving myself to him. It was about proving to myself that I could stand tall, even without his approval. But as much as I tried to convince myself that the victory was enough, it wasn't. I realized that the money, no matter how much it was, could never replace what I had lost in the process. I had won the battle, but in the process, I had lost a part of myself, a part of my family. A few months later, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the reflection of the man who had fought for everything but had come out with nothing. The money was in my bank account, yes. The control was mine. But the empty feeling inside me remained. What was the point of all this, if I had to sacrifice everything I cared about along the way? I thought about what Amit had said, about how I'd always feel like I had something to prove. Was he right? Would I always be caught in this cycle, trying to gain approval from a father who was no longer around? Would I ever escape the shadow of a man who could never truly see me? As I walked away from the mirror, I realized that the real victory wasn't in the money or the inheritance. It was in the freedom to walk away from the past and begin again. To live for myself, not for anyone else's approval. But it was also in the painful realization that some battles, no matter how hard you fight, are never truly won. Months passed, and life went on, but the shadow of that courtroom battle never truly lifted. I continued with the business, I handled the money, my father's legacy, but it all felt hollow. Each dollar I spent, each decision I made, came with the lingering question, was this worth it? Amit, for his part, didn't let up. He kept trying to reach out, texts, emails, even showing up uninvited at my office. I ignored him. I couldn't bring myself to face him. The animosity, the betrayal, it was too raw. But he was relentless, like he always had been. He had a way of wearing down walls, of making you feel guilty even when you knew you were in the right. And I hated him for it. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from him that stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't the usual passive-aggressive comment or a plea for reconciliation. This time, it was different. He wanted to meet. No lawyers, no business talk. Just the two of us. I stared at the message for what felt like hours. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to shut the door completely on him. But something else. Maybe it was the years of shared memories. Maybe it was the nagging thought that we couldn't go on like this forever. Made me respond. I agreed to meet him. And that decision would be the beginning of everything unraveling again. We met at a quiet cafe, a place where we had shared many breakfasts and lunch breaks in the past, before everything fell apart. The same familiar faces served our drinks, but nothing felt the same. The tension was thick in the air, and neither of us knew where to begin. Amit sat across from me, his expression unreadable. "I'm surprised you agreed to meet," he said, breaking the silence. "I didn't think you'd want to talk." "I didn't," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "But I figured we'd never get anywhere if we didn't." For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared into his cup of coffee. The silence between us felt heavier than ever. Finally, he spoke again. "I know I've messed things up," he said quietly, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I've been selfish. I've let my own ego and ambition cloud everything. I know I hurt you. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm sorry." It was the first time he had ever apologized. Genuinely, it seemed. And it threw me off. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The anger, the hurt, the bitterness that had built up over the years, it all surged inside me. But so did something else. A part of me wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Amit," I said after a long pause. "But I don't want to keep living like this. I don't want to feel this. Resentment every time I think about you. Every time I think about what happened." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, if you're willing to give me a chance." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't all lost. Maybe we could rebuild, piece by piece. But at the same time, a small voice inside of me whispered that this could be yet another attempt to manipulate me. The question lingered. Could I ever truly trust him again? The weeks that followed were filled with tension and small steps toward reconciliation. Amit and I started having regular meetings. Not about business, not about money, but about what had happened between us. We talked about our childhood, about the moments that had shaped us both. We discussed our father, how he had been a man of great strength but also a man who had caused so much pain without even realizing it. It was uncomfortable, and it wasn't easy, but it was the beginning of something new. Still, there were moments of doubt. I would catch myself thinking about the past, the years of competition, the manipulation, the resentment. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to him, trying to outdo him, trying to be seen as something more than just the little brother. And now I was trying to let that go. It wasn't easy. One day, after a particularly difficult conversation, Amit and I sat in silence for a while. The tension was palpable, but there was something different now, something softer. He broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, "but I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to make up for all the things I did wrong." I didn't know how to respond. The old me would have rejected his apology outright, would have walked away without looking back. But I had changed. I had realized that holding on to all that anger wasn't making me stronger. It was making me weaker. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same again," I said, my voice quiet. "But maybe we don't have to be." The years that followed weren't easy. The relationship between me and Amit remained complicated, and there were still times when the scars from our past would reopen. But over time, we found a way to coexist, tentatively, cautiously, but together. The money, the inheritance, and the years of conflict faded into the background, though they were never entirely gone. What mattered now was that we were trying to build a new relationship, not based on competition or resentment, but on understanding and, eventually, mutual respect. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But after everything, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles we face aren't in the courtroom or in business. They're the ones we fight within ourselves. And sometimes winning those battles is what makes all the difference. A year had passed since the court case, and life had begun to settle into a new routine. The business was running smoothly, and the money, while still a point of contention, was no longer the thing that defined my relationship with Amit. We had learned to work together. At least professionally, but personally, things were still a delicate balance. There were moments when I would catch myself looking at him, wondering if I had made the right decision to let him back into my life. There was one evening, late in the fall, when we had a business dinner scheduled. It was the first time in months that we would be spending time together outside of work. For a while, I had convinced myself that things were different, that we could be civil, but I wasn't ready to trust him fully. Not yet. Not after everything. I showed up at the restaurant first, a quiet, upscale place with soft lighting and intimate booths. As I sat there, waiting for him, I couldn't help but replay the years of conflict in my mind. The jealousy, the competition, the endless striving to be seen as enough in my father's eyes. All of it had come to a head over the money, but deep down, it wasn't about the money at all. It was about the years of being overshadowed, of feeling like I was never good enough. Ahmed arrived about 10 minutes later, as composed as always. He shook my hand, and I could see the familiar mix of confidence and arrogance in his eyes. But there was something different about him now, a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. It was subtle, but it was there. He was still Ahmed, the older brother who always had to be in control, but now I saw cracks in the facade. We sat down, and for the first few minutes we didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. He picked up the menu, glanced at it briefly, and then put it down. "Are we really going to do this?" he asked, his voice surprisingly calm. "Do what?" I replied, unsure of where he was going with this. "Pretend everything is fine," he said. "I know it's not. I know you still think I'm not worth trusting. Hell, I don't blame you. But I've been trying for a long time to figure out how to make this right." His words caught me off guard. I had expected him to approach the conversation with his usual bravado, to tell me that everything was fine, that we were past it. But this felt different. "I don't know if things will ever be fine between us, Ahmed," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I used to. And I'm not sure that I should." He nodded, looking down at his hands for a moment before looking back up at me. "I get that. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I'm not asking for that," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that I'm here. Not just for the business, not just for the inheritance, but for you. I never thought I'd have to say this, but I was wrong. I've always been wrong about a lot of things, especially about us." The weight of his words hung in the air. It wasn't an apology. At least not the kind I was expecting. But it was something more. It was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in the armor he had built around himself for so long. And for the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. Over the next few months, things began to change, slowly and in ways I hadn't expected. Ahmed didn't just become a better business partner. He started showing up more, physically and emotionally. He called me just to check in, asked how I was doing, offered help without expecting anything in return. He was trying, and I had to admit it made a difference. But that didn't mean everything was fixed. Trust was never something that would come easily, not after everything we had been through. But over time, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. We began having more open conversations, not just about the business but about our lives. Our childhood, our father, the things we never really talked about. For the first time in years, we weren't just brothers. We were two men, trying to figure out what it meant to have a relationship that wasn't built on competition and jealousy. Then, one evening, as we sat in the office after a long day, Ahmed did something that took me completely by surprise. "I want you to know that I'm proud of you," he said quietly, looking at me across the table. "I've always seen you as the little brother, but the truth is, you've always had the potential to do more. I've been too caught up in myself to see that. I'm sorry for that. I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to pretend it didn't matter. But another part of me, the part that had always longed for that kind of recognition, felt a weight lift off my shoulders." "Thanks," I said, my voice quieter than usual. "That means a lot, and it did. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the inheritance or the business. It was about the realization that maybe, after everything, we could rebuild something together. Maybe, just maybe, this battle was worth fighting after all, not for the inheritance, but for the chance to be brothers again." As months turned into a year, I started to see something in Ahmed that I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just his efforts to rebuild our business or his desire to have a better relationship with me. It was the sincerity in his actions. He wasn't perfect, and I wasn't expecting him to be, but I started to feel a sense of respect building between us again, something I thought was lost forever. However, despite the progress, there was still an elephant in the room: the inheritance, the business. It was always there, lingering beneath the surface. We had done a decent job of compartmentalizing our issues and moving forward, but I knew that the final hurdle was yet to come. One evening, as we were having a drink after work, Amit spoke up. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "About the business, about the inheritance, about us." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. After everything we had been through, I knew this conversation was going to be important. "I've been selfish for a long time," Amit admitted, looking down at his glass before meeting my eyes. "I've made decisions based on what I wanted, not what was best for both of us. I took more than I was entitled to, and in the process, I hurt you. I hurt our family, but I want to fix that. I want to make it right." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words I had waited years to hear were finally coming out of his mouth, but I wasn't sure how to process them. It was a big admission, one I hadn't expected from him. "What are you saying, Amit?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, despite the emotions swirling inside me. "I'm saying that I'm ready to give up my control," he said, his voice full of conviction. "I want to share the business." I sat back in my chair, stunned. This was more than I had ever hoped for. It wasn't just a small gesture. It was the acknowledgement that I was no longer the little brother, the one who always had to prove himself. It was him acknowledging my worth, not just as a business partner. "You're serious?" I asked, disbelief still heavy in my voice. He nodded, his gaze never wavering. "I've thought about this long and hard. It's not just about the money or the business anymore. It's about family. It's about what's fair, and you deserve more than what I gave you before. I want to make it right. I know I've messed up, but this is my way of showing you that I'm ready to move forward." I didn't know what to say. For the longest time I had wanted something from him. Recognition, respect, equality. And here it was, in front of me. But I had to be sure. I had to be sure that this wasn't just another empty promise. "Why now?" I asked. "Why, after everything we've been through?" Amit paused, his eyes searching for the right words. "Because I finally get it. I get that family isn't just about what you get. It's about what you give. I spent too long focused on my own success, my own vision. But I see now that we can only succeed together. I can't do this without you." I sat in silence for a moment, processing everything he had said. For years I had been bitter, holding on to the anger and resentment that had built up between us. But in that moment, I realized that I had been holding on to it for too long. If we were going to rebuild, if we were going to move forward, I had to let go of the past. "I'm in," I said finally, my voice steady. "I'm in, Amit. Let's do this, together." The following weeks were a blur of meetings, discussions, and a complete restructuring of the business. It was a strange feeling, working alongside Amit, not as rivals, but as partners. We divided the responsibilities, the roles, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on equal ground. The inheritance, once a symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us, became a symbol of new beginnings. The money, the business, the legacy, none of it mattered if we couldn't find a way to work together. Several months later, as we stood in the office finalizing a major deal we had worked on together, Amit turned to me with a rare smile on his face. It wasn't the smug smile I had seen in the past, but a genuine one. "We did it," he said. "Together." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride I hadn't expected. Yeah, we did. We had done it. We had rebuilt what had been broken. The money didn't define us anymore. Our relationship didn't revolve around competition. It revolved around mutual respect and shared goals. We had finally found a way to be brothers again. It had been over a year since we made the decision to move forward, to rebuild what had been broken between us. The business was thriving, and so was our relationship. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old habits crept in, when the competition between us resurfaced, but we had learned to navigate those moments without letting them tear us apart. The biggest change, though it wasn't in the business or the money, it was in how we saw each other. Amit and I had finally become partners in the truest sense of the word. We respected each other's strengths and we acknowledged our weaknesses. We no longer saw each other as rivals, but as teammates, fighting for the same goal. But there was still one thing left unresolved: the family. Our mother had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal. She had never once sided with either of us, never expressed a preference for one over the other. She was a quiet observer, watching as we fought over everything that mattered to us. I understood her silence, but a part of me always wished she had said something, anything, that could have brought us together sooner. One afternoon, we gathered at her house, just the three of us sitting around the table. It was a rare occasion, but the air between us felt lighter, less tense. Amit had called her earlier in the day, and this time it wasn't about business or the inheritance. It was just about being together. For the first time in a long time, I realized how much I had missed this. The family dinners, the laughter, the shared moments that had seemed so ordinary before everything fell apart. "Mom," I said, breaking the silence. "We've been through a lot these past couple of years." She looked up from her cup of tea, her eyes tired but kind. "Yes," she replied softly. "I've seen all of it. But you're both here now. That's what matters." I glanced over at Amit, who was sitting across from me, his hands folded in front of him. He looked different, softer, more relaxed. He wasn't the same person he had been when the fight over the inheritance started. Neither of us was. We had both changed, and for the better. "Mom, we just want you to know that we've made peace," Amit said, his voice low. "We've been trying. For us, for the family." I could feel the weight of his words, and I knew that he meant them. He had spent years trying to be the perfect son, the one who had it all figured out. But I saw now that he had been just as lost as I had been, struggling to find his place in a family where the expectations were always so high. "You've both grown," our mother said, a faint smile crossing her lips. "I can see it. It's been a long road, but I'm proud of you." The simplicity of her words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that from her, how much I had longed for her approval, her acknowledgement. It wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about family, about us, about the love and support that had always been there, even when it felt like we were miles apart. "I've missed this," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I've missed us." Amit nodded, his eyes softening. "Me too. But I think we finally figured it out." We sat there for a while, just talking, the conversation flowing easily. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it felt like the beginning of something new. We weren't the same people who had fought so bitterly over money and control. We were different now. We had learned, painfully at times, that the things we had been fighting for were never the real prize. A few weeks later, Amit and I made a decision together, a decision that would change everything for us. We would sell the family business, split the profits, and use that money to invest in something that truly mattered to both of us. A charity. Something that would give back. Something that would help people in need. Something that would leave a legacy beyond the one built on money and power. It wasn't about redemption. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about moving forward, together. And for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I felt like I was no longer chasing something I could never reach. I wasn't chasing my father's approval, or Amit's, or anyone else's. I was finally living for myself, for my own values, my own sense of purpose. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Amit and I made the decision. We sat at the same table where we had shared so many tense meals in the past, but this time there was no anger, no distrust between us. Instead, there was a shared understanding that we had both been through hell and come out on the other side stronger. "We're doing the right thing," Amit said, his voice steady. "I know it hasn't been easy, but I think this is what Dad would have wanted." I nodded, looking at the papers in front of us. We had made the final arrangements to sell the business, dividing the proceeds evenly. But the real purpose behind the decision was clear. We wanted to make sure that what we built together wasn't just about profit. It was about making a difference. Our charity, which we had started with the profits from the sale, was now fully operational. It focused on providing education and resources for underprivileged communities. Amit had become passionate about youth development, while I focused on giving back to families who had lost their homes, much like we had when we were younger. The first few months were difficult, navigating the waters of philanthropy, but it was also the most fulfilling work either of us had ever done. For the first time, our relationship wasn't about competing. It was about contributing, about doing something meaningful. I still remember the day we visited one of the community centers funded by the charity. We were both dressed casually, no suits, no business talk, just two brothers trying to make a difference. A group of children was gathered around, listening intently to a volunteer who was teaching them how to read and write. The look on their faces was priceless. There was a sense of hope in their eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. "This is it," I said quietly, turning to Amit. "This is what we were meant to do." He smiled, the warmth in his eyes genuine. "You're right. This feels right." It was in that moment that I truly understood what we had been fighting for all along. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about winning. It was about legacy, but not the kind we had once thought of, the kind that wasn't built on material wealth or pride. It was the kind that lasted beyond us, the kind that helped others, that left a mark on the world that couldn't be erased. We continued our work with the charity, but the changes were not just external. Amit and I had finally reached a point of peace in our relationship. We weren't perfect, and I didn't expect us to be. But we had found a way to communicate, to work together without letting old grudges creep in. One day, as we sat in the office reviewing our latest project proposal, Amit turned to me with a smile. "You know, we've come a long way," he said, chuckling. "I never thought we'd get here." I leaned back in my chair, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I don't think either of us did." "I'm glad we did, though," he said. "It's been a hell of a ride, but I wouldn't have done it with anyone else." That was the moment I realized. This was the brother I had been searching for all along. Not the one I had competed with, not the one who had always been the golden child, but the one who had finally come to see me as an equal. And I had done the same for him. We had both grown, both learned the hard way that family was worth more than anything we had ever fought for. A few years later, as we stood in front of a group of donors at a fundraising event, I looked over at Amit and I saw not just my brother, but my partner in something much bigger than either of us. We were no longer the two brothers fighting over a father's legacy. We were two men working together to create a future for others, a future that was built on compassion, understanding, and the lessons we had learned through our struggles. The past would always be a part of us, the rivalry, the pain, the betrayal, but it didn't define us anymore. What defined us now was what we had built, together. "We did good, didn't we?" I said, turning to him with a smile. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, we did. And for the first time in my life, I realized that winning wasn't about getting everything for myself. It was about finding peace with who I was and building something that would last. A legacy not of money, but of love."